high tech for most of my career, and I started more in with technology companies that develop products and services for the various sectors that I've worked in. I then made the transition to nonprofits in that I became a member of board of directors of standards groups. And then ultimately started managing standards groups. And it's really where I met Andy Updegrove. My first experience with a consortia was the ASB Industry Consortium probably 20 years ago. And Andy had created the whole governance structure for ASB Industry Consortium. And then recently, I got tapped to create the Mojaloop Foundation, which kind of merges technology, philanthropy, and consortia all in one entity. So the brainchild for Mojaloop was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have a division called Financial Services for the Poor. And what they're trying to do is find ways to address financial inclusion. And what they found was that there were technology gaps in the banking system that was prohibiting the unbanked and underserved from getting access to financial services. So they created an open source project called Mojaloop. And for several years, they invested in its development of the core software architecture. And then they came to me and said, look, we want to spin this out. We want this to be an independently governed project. We want other parties to be able to support it, fund it, maintain it, but also have a say in its long-term direction. So what I did was working with Andy and others. We created the Mojaloop.org, a 501c3, created a board and governance structure, and now we've been building the community and focusing on deployments in Africa and Asia and other developing markets. I really admire people that have the patience for the long term. Our projects are very complex. They have many different stakeholders, central banks, governments, commercial sector, and to develop a project like this, it's not a short-term shrink-wrap solution. It really requires maybe a couple of years of education, planning, implementation design to get to the end game of where you have a system that goes live. So to have the vision that like the Gates Foundation had and other people that have projects like this, to stick with it over the long term, you don't have instant gratification. You don't get to financial inclusion overnight. And so I really admire the people that have that vision and the patience to stick with it. Some of my challenges have to do with fear and uncertainty with regard to open source. Open source is a very well understood concept in North America and Europe and in developed economies. And there's legal issues, IP concerns, unsureness about security and other matters with regard to open source. So really going back 15, 20 years to the things that we used to tell the banks here in the United States, why open source is safe and secure. Dusting off those old messages and making sure we don't take for granted that they understand why open source is good and safe and viable. Have a plan, stick to the plan, but know that things are going to change tactically. I mean, one of the things that's really important for us to do is reinforce our mission. And yes, all of the little tactical activities that happen day to day to get to your end goal will be refined. I'm not an expert at projecting my needs are going to be 3 years now from a staffing and a finance standpoint. But by sticking to mission, having a plan, and tweaking it regularly, hopefully with a good board that provides strategic counsel, is critically important. And it's so hard, particularly for commercial entities that have shareholders or the stock market influences to have to mitigate and contend with. But I think it's sound advice for whether you're a startup, a commercial entity, or a nonprofit, is stick to your plan, stick to your vision. If it resonates with other people, they'll deal with the tactical adjustments that you need to make over time. I see Mojaloop as an entity being much smaller than we are today. Right now, we're building up an ecosystem in developing markets. So we're doing a lot of advocacy and education that long-term will not be as necessary. We also will see more commercial players involved in bringing the central banks and the digital financial service providers along to use Mojaloop and to knit Mojaloop together cross-border amongst different marketplaces, different types of fintechs and microfinance companies. So the ecosystem will be more vibrant several years from now, and the ecosystem will take more control over the ongoing activity associated with Mojaloop. We'll be able to scale back a little bit, and certainly I know our benefactors would appreciate that as well, but I think the marketplace will step up. It's just we're early. So many clients that have similar attributes to ourselves. I'm kind of a hybrid from what I've been working with in the past. I've worked closely with Gesmer Updegrove with standards group and advocacy groups. What we did was took best practices from those two types of organizations and added this philanthropic side of our work. And so all along our course, our evolution, creating bylaws and governance structure, Gesmer Updegrove has been critical. And it's not just bylaws, because I know those aren't particularly sexy, but understanding the nuances of what we can and cannot do as a 501c3. Because of course we need an income stream. Yes, we're not a for-profit, but we still need money coming in. Knowing what we can and can't do, what's within boundaries. And because they've been working with these types of companies for so long, they see different structures, and they can provide us advice on how to create sponsorship opportunities, membership opportunities that can help us diversify our income stream and be less dependent strictly on philanthropies. So having a lot of practical experience and examples to cite and introduce us to entities that have created similar structures has been just a shortcut for me in making decisions about our structure and how we evolve as a nonprofit. It's experience and the expertise in this category. I mean, a lot of people, when they ask me what I do and I start explaining that I run nonprofit consortia, their eyes kind of glaze over. It's a very specialized area. It's not traditional tech law, it's not traditional startup law, but it's working very closely with some of the largest technology companies in the world. And so if I have to put a set of bylaws in front of IBM or Intel or Google, I know Gesmer's already put bylaws in front of them. They understand what flies with their corporate offices, their corporate legal teams. So again, that expertise and experience just is a shortcut for me. I don't have to go to Intel's legal firm and say, here's some bylaws that you've probably never seen before. Gesmer knows what flies in those large corporate entities. And so that's been very helpful in all the consortia that I've worked with. But again, just having the practical experience, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what would run afoul of the IRS, no, you don't want to go there. All of that practical experience for a very specialized category of law, consortia, IP for consortia and the like, has been just immensely helpful.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like more information, you can check us out on social media or on our website at gesmer.com.